Evening all, welcome to another PlayChess Kingscrusher radio show. So this is about 10 past 9, approaching 10 past 9, Tuesday nights. So we're going to carry on looking at the best of the best, and we're going to go to the 1960s, and this is actually part one of the 1960s, which is the missing part. I got confused because actually Fischer played two brilliant games against the Byrne brothers. Now this game, played in 1956, was against Donald Byrne. The other one we looked at was against his brother Robert Byrne. Okay, so this was played in the third Rosenwald Trophy, New York. So USA 1956. Let's have a look. Knight f3 from Donald Byrne. We have the symmetrical knight f6, c4, and Fischer plays g6. Knight c3, bishop g7, d4, black castles, bishop f4. We have the move I've got the wrong game. We've definitely had a look at this game. This is the wrong game. How can I keep getting these games confused? Sorry about this. 1956? No. The confusion never ends here. 1960. In the 1960s, 1963, against Robert Byrne. Great. It seems a bit too familiar. 1963, pardon me, against Robert Byrne. Okay. Welcome to another Kingscrusher radio show. So this is Tuesday, approaching 10 past 9. We're going to have a look at the 1960s, part 1 of 5. This is against Robert Byrne. Not to be confused with Donald Byrne, which we've seen before. Yeah, so Fischer was black this time against Robert Byrne in 1963. Okay, Robert Eugene Byrne started off with d4. Fischer played knight f6. We have c4, g6, and now g3. c6, as though the intention is to blunt this bishop when it ends up on g2, and that's exactly what's played. d5. Is it a target? C takes d, and it is targeted with knight c3. Pressure is put on the d5 pawn. e3. Black castled. Fischer castled. Knight ge2. Knight c6. White castles. b6. b3, and now Fischer played bishop a6, and a symmetrical kind of reply, bishop a3. Now here we have rook e8, which seems to be preparing e5, so Fischer's not entirely frightened about having an isolated queen's pawn here, because it is potentially double-edged, it would seem. Queen d2, e5, he does go for it, but in his own annotations he did admit to being worried about weakening his queen's pawn, but he felt the tremendous activity of his minor pieces would permit white no time to exploit this. Okay, so piece activity is a key thing here. So that trade-off, it's a very brutal trade-off between structure concerns and piece activity. So black's pieces do seem to be becoming more active here. White did take on e5. So knight takes e5. You can see that white also has two main islands, one there and one there. So black now has 3 pawn islands, including the queen's pawn. But look at the pieces; they're all pretty energetic. We have rook fd1. Now this does take away from the f2 pawn. It's hard to see why that would be an issue here, though. But it might have been better to use the other rook, and this is the famous case of the wrong rook. The other rook might have been a better choice. Actually, let's put on a Koblents and just check this out for a moment as well. Yeah, the engine without doubt is suggesting using the A rook, not this one. Okay, and in fact there's an issue that really is emphasized with this. Knight d3. So it looks like a nicely centralized piece there, but it is on that soft spot. But you might not think there's any big deal here. We see the move queen c2 because black was threatening knight e4 here, and that would cement that knight on d3. I'll give you an example. If rook b1, just an example, I think knight e4 is a good move among others. Just in this example, just cementing that knight on d3, which would be pretty unpleasant. So the idea is just by shifting the queen here, just to threaten now. Rook takes d3. So no time for anything, it seems. So this seems as though if the knight retreats, that in fact, isn't this quite bad for black? If the knight retreats here, rook ac1, you can see white's pieces are actually quite beautiful. The bishops are, striking on not nice diagonals. There's the weakened pawn here, and there's a possibility of knight f4, and this d pawn is going to be very troublesome to defend, especially if you consider this bishop's like in the wrong place to defend it, and it's going to take more time. There's a nice blockade square. It'll be very unpleasant to go to e5, and on c5, pardon me, if the knight goes to c5, sorry, after queen c2, let's have a look at knight c5. White could take. And this, again, it's kind of unpleasant for black. There might already be a tactical threat of knight takes d5 here. This just looks pretty unpleasant. Let's just put an idea here just to show knight takes, bishop takes, f here. Sorry. Yeah, that's just winning that pawn for nothing. Right, so anyway, so what do you think Fischer played in this position after queen c2? So black's play. What would you play here for black? So I've kind of helped you that it looks unpleasant to play either knight e5 or knight c5. So what to play here? What would you play with black? Yeah, you might have seen this game before as well, but also just instinctively you might think grabbing this because it's going to be at least 2 pawns, right? Knight takes f2. The king took. We have check, and now here after knight takes e3, the astonishing thing about this position is actually this position here after queen d2. This is really quite astonishing now. Now Robert Byrne, I believe he was an IM at the time. I just want to check that. So Robert Byrne awarded the IM title 10 years before, 1952, and he earned the GM title in 1964, a year after this game. Yeah. So a year after this game he was GM, but he seems to completely underestimate the potential in this position. And yeah, it's very, very easy to probably think black is lost. Yeah, but it depends what you think. Black's play here then. What would you do? Any ideas? Okay, now if you said d4, let's have a look at d4. d4 can still have the same idea, actually, funny enough. It can still have the same idea as the game continuation. d4 is actually a very strong move. So, but you really need the game continuation in mind. So the idea is not to take the rook, believe it or not. Because if you take the rook, white's actually just a little bit better. This d pawn's still a problem. White's king is pretty safe. That's the key thing. White's king is pretty safe. If say rook c8, knight d4 is okay, or there's other moves. But contrast this now with the other possibility which is played to take this bishop. This creates, as we've seen in many iconic games recently, this vacuum of light square weaknesses. You see, these light square weaknesses, we've seen this theme many times now in these absolutely iconic games. This is probably one of the most important themes that the recent games we've looked at demonstrate, especially the bishop without a counterpart. There's no bishop, there's no counterpart to this bishop, which means add these two factors up, the weaknesses of the light squares and the bishop without the counterpart. So there's a really there's one move which sets light to the light squares in this position. So what do you think that move is? So black to play here to set light to those light squares. You've got a resource here which there's no counterpart. So it's almost as if, let's say, if there was a mathematical perspective to this, it's almost as if you can always tip the equation in your favour. Because there's no counterpart, you can always tip that equation, if it was a maths equation, in your favour. There's more weight to your light square pressure than there might be defence. So think about this. Now if you say bishop b7, you must consider the blockade. Bang, it closes the door, shuts the door on the bishop. That blockade is very powerful. Nimzovich goes on about blockades as essential here to keep the king cozy and warm, not to have this bishop on that diagonal. That's not a way of setting light to the light squares. No, it's actually d4 to make sure this bishop's got that whole massive diagonal to play with. And in fact, after knight takes d4, I mean, what else here might as well be taken. If we move the knight, then bang, rook takes e2 check, protected by that bishop. Is over. So that takes that, but then we have this setting light to the light squares with bishop b7 check. So the king is at black's mercy now. King f1, and apparently in a room set aside for commentaries, two grandmasters are stating, for the benefit of spectators, that Byrne had a one game, yeah, but after this next move, white resigns. So what do you think the next move is? Black to play here, is more than strong. This bishop on b7, it's enormous. With those light square weaknesses, it's like gigantic. So black's playing here. It's the move queen d7. It just goes into those light squares even more with the threat of queen h3 check. And in fact, Robert Byrne resigned. Give you an example, some variations. He resigned here. If queen f2, now let's say check, king g1, there's a very nice tactical idea in this position, which is actually quite beautiful as well. It's a very beautiful idea and really shows the power of tactics in chess as well. To yeah, I mean, it's okay to sort of have general things to consider like weak light squares, but sometimes you really need some pretty harsh, brutal tactics to exploit light squares. Now here there is such a brutal tactical idea, it's unbelievable. This next idea, this next move in this variation, black to play here, very brutal idea, very brutal. Forcing move, continuation. By the way, High Clim Killer, I think he's Muswell Hill Chess Cup, isn't that? Okay, the very brutal forcing move to try and drag the queen away from the defense of g2. It's very beautiful, very forcing. Rook e1 check, very forcing. Now if queen takes, we just mate on g2 immediately. And the point is dragging the rook away from d4. We then play bishop takes d4, which pins the queen, and there's no defense here. If the queen moves away again, we just mate. So the queen g2 threat, is the threat here, and there's nothing. You know, we don't even have to take the queen. Bang, queen g2. There's nothing. Rook e3, we just take that, and again we're fighting queen g2. Yeah, it's just absolutely blistering, this position. I mean, if you just look at the aesthetics as well, this crossfire of the bishops and the queen just parked there next to the king. It's astonishing demonstration of light square weaknesses. It really is. If we go back here to queen d7, let's have a look at some other defensive tries. Yeah, check. In this variation, there's a resource which comes into its own, because you see now there's some differences with d4 covered, but there's a resource which really is a killer in its own right now. In this variation, can you see what black would play here? Black's play here. This is another little tactical test in this variation. Black is still crushing here. Actually, there's probably one or two or even three moves which is all winning, but there's one which is more winning than the others, let's say. More easily winning than the others. What would you do here? Rook e3 is a very interesting suggestion, by the way. Now, if this is taken, yeah, queen g2. Actually, I think knight d5 apparently is a way to equalize off the takes. This apparently this is this is getting crazy. No, anyway, it's just, apparently this is equal. Anyway, this is just getting crazy. No, it's not rook e3. Anyway, there's something much more forcing than rook e3, which is just basically bishop h6, just hitting the queen. So if queen f2, we just slip the bishop into e3 to pin the queen. So yeah, this just wins the queen outright, really. Queen's got to stand guard on g2. If knight d5, giving up the queen here doesn't help things too much. Does not help things too much. Black is just totally winning here. Okay. So yeah, bishop h6 in this line on knight db5. On knight f3, let's have a look at knight f3. Probably there's a few interesting moves here. So this hits the queen. It seems actually quite a clever defensive try, hitting the queen here. But queen g4 might be one of the stronger moves. Pardon me. After queen f4, check, and this line still has this bishop h6 behind the scenes, but bishop h6. And still going into e3 with deadly effect. So queen d4, bishop e3. And picking up the queen for 2 pieces is good enough here because the king's so exposed. If we have this kind of variation. Yeah, it's just winning for black. So yeah, there's nothing, it seems. This is why he resigned. Stunning he resigned here. It just creates a bit of mystery. So we've had a look at a few defensive tries. They all seem to fail. Queen f2, knight b5, knight f3. They all seem to fail. King g1. Queen h3 again. And okay, let's go with, say, knight c2. Let's go with knight c2. There's bang, bishop takes c3. This line is in this position. There are various ways to skin the cat. One is queen h5 with the idea of rook e2, and the bishop's controlling e1. So this rook e2 is actually very difficult to do anything about. And if knight e3, yeah, this is just, it's all falling to bits. Basically, bang. And queen d5, yeah, eyes the weaknesses there. And if king f1, I think we end up losing the rook on a1. So yeah, every single defensive try is basically just doesn't work. It's incredible. So yeah, we've looked at numerous defensive tries. They all just don't work. Nothing works. So queen f2 was the game choice to try and sorry, after king here, queen d7, that wasn't the game choice. No, the game just ended here. Now Fischer had hoped for, yeah, this line in particular. This was Fischer's favourite, the queen f2 line. Yeah, this is the one he really liked, with good reason, good taste. Okay. So yeah, that was another great example of what happens with fianchettoed bishops. I think they're a modern feature of the game. I don't think fianchettoed bishops in the Romantic era of chess were a kind of very popular thing to do. So maybe it's like an over-sophistication in some respects of modern play, the fianchettoed bishops. They do have this downside. If the bishop is taken off or somehow sacrificed to get rid of that bishop, it can have devastating effect on king safety. So let's see. Let's have a look at another game now. Best of the best 1960s. This is Spassky against Bronstein in USSR Championship of 1960. And this game was featured in a near construction of the same position in From Russia with Love, a James Bond film, From Russia with Love, which is great, actually. What I particularly love about that James Bond film, I do like the chess hall. It's really beautiful, the chess hall that they play in the film. If you haven't watched the James Bond film, check it out, From Russia with Love. So anyway, in this game, they use this, basically a variation of this game. So Spassky playing white against, they changed the name of the players. So E4, Spassky playing white. David Bronstein plays E5, F4. E takes. So the King's Gambit is accepted. Knight F3, D5. An energetic attempt to have a nice game with the black pieces. Although engines already seem to think white's at least okay here. This might not be the most critical test of the King's Gambit. Although, yeah, no, black should be okay. Let's see, Knight C3, Knight E7, D4, black castles, Bishop D3, Knight D7, white castles. So there's a concern here about when white regains that F pawn that's going to unleash this dynamic F file pressure. We have H6. Now Knight E4 is played, which is interesting because it actually means, hold on a sec, isn't it this, which looks pretty nasty. So this is actually a very interesting idea. If you look at this position, there's not too much pawn mobility. This knight's constraining the c pawn. This whole continuation is actually kind of wonderful in its own right for pawn mobility, if nothing else, at this stage. How sacrificing this, it's double pawns, but white gets his pawns going now with c4, and he takes on e3, and then c5. So you can see with this pawn mobility comes some extra access to this diagonal. This diagonal is a little bit more sensitive now. Bishop e7, bishop c2. So this brews up the idea of a classic battery against the light squares, so with queen d3 at some point. But not knight f6, because that would be silly, because the knight comes to rescue h7, but maybe with knight d6. So that looks like the basic intention here at the moment, just queen d3 and knight d6. Now black played here rook e8, queen d3. So there's a big threat now of knight d6 to go into h7 and just like mate, quick 1-2. But this threat is actually ignored because black thought he's like creating a big threat of his own, e2. However, what do you think Boris Spassky played in this position? So white play. Does he do it anyway? Doesn't he just want to take this pawn first? Okay, he plays it anyway. He just gives up the rook. He could have taken this, and it should be better for white actually. This might objectively be the best way to play. Objectively, this position is quite nice for white because that bishop is good on the diagonal. You can see that f7 sensitive. You can see there's a coordination point on f7 with an immediate threat. Bishop takes f7 here, and knight e5. It's quite nasty for black. This kind of position is just it's nice for white. If you look at this, there's a lot of pressure. If the rook's scurrying back, it's kind of nasty. Black can never really, I think, take here because of that. It's just a very, very pleasant position. So that would have been the safe thing to do, but he created something very beautiful with this knight d6. It wasn't immediately taken, the rook. Actually, knight f8 was played. Now it turns out that maybe taking is a way of, believe it or not, finding a Houdini-like escape with bishop takes d6. Houdini is in the magician, the not the chess engine. So, for example, the king's got e7. That's the point. And if we try and stop the escape of the king, it's renewed again. The escape square is renewed with c takes, and it's actually made use of. And here, there's knight e5, and this looks scary, but apparently, with absolute best play, this turns out to be equal with absolute best play. Black gets away with it and should be equal. We can even carry this on further and further and further, but basically there's no forced mate there, and it should be about equal. So that was an interesting computer defense available with e takes f1. Is there something we can learn from that? It's subtle escape squares, preparation, evacuation, escape squares, getting the escape square e7 just in time. Because actually, if we look at alternatives here, on bishop f6, I don't think this works out very well. Check. There's a move here to take the e7 escape square, actually, which is either knight f5 or even this straight away, just letting the king go there because of the check. And this is a forced checkmate off the check. Check. It's a forced checkmate. If here, for example, queen takes here, yeah, the king's just, it's going to be mated. So anyway, so yeah, it seems as though e takes was drawing, but in fact, even bishop takes d6. This position, we just transpose into the same thing basically with this just-in-time escape, getting that escape square back. We transpose. We've seen that. So anyway, in the game now, we see after knight d6, we see knight f8, and maybe David Bronstein missed this wonderful idea now, that actually the light squares around Black's king are perilously weak, but how to tap into those light square weaknesses? It seems the knight's covered h7, but there's more than one soft spot here. So white's play here, how would you exploit the light squares soft spots around the black king in this position? What would you play here with white? Okay, I'm going to show you. Knight takes f7, hits the queen, and yeah, sacking the rook. That rook is now taken before thinking about the knight. Now, if king takes, this wasn't played. If king takes, that's just a mate in 6 after knight e5 double check. And here there's a wonderful, brutal, tactical idea, which is delicious. Absolutely delicious. It's a mate in 5. Can you see delicious move here in this variation? White's play here. What would you play in this position? And if you can see it, I'm sure you'll sleep well finding this combination, if you can see it, as well as getting 500 points. This is a very, very nice variation of the game. Perhaps even more aesthetically beautiful than the previous game we saw. This is the height of chess tactical aesthetics. There's two moves actually which are crushing, but one of them is aesthetically of the highest order. So yeah, you do get some points for rook takes f8 because that is winning. After here, the light squares are totally gone, and there's a forced mating sequence with this. Apparently, there's a forced mating sequence where knight g6 checkmate is now threatened, and black has to give up the queen. It's hopeless. But can I call you back to this position? Okay. Well done. Rook takes f8, but a beautiful one. Can you see the beautiful one? The super beautiful one. We've covered rook takes f8. Well done for rook takes f8. But there's another one. There's another one, which is wonderful. Which is absolutely wonderful. You could frame this other one. You could put it in an art gallery. It's a mate in 5 as well. It's actually kind of efficient. Okay. Oh, bang! It actually weakens the entire diagonal, believe it or not, because at the moment, the bishop and knight are helping each other for e6. If ever there was a check, there's bishop e6. But with the knight distracted, this diagonal is now weakened, and in fact, this is a killer check. Bishop b3 check. You see that there's no bishop e6 now that the knight's been dragged over there, and the king can't go there, of course. And if the king goes here, then that's checkmate. Yeah, so black's computer would drag it out, just giving up the queen, giving up the bishop. We're going to end up in this checkmate. Yeah. So anyway, that's a cool variation in the game. So let's go back. So in the game, so taking, just to recap, it's a wonderful thing here. It's a wonderful mechanism, this. Bear in mind for your own games. it's a wonderful one. But anyway, no, in this position, bishop f5 was played. Was tried. That was taken, and there's still a nasty threat of bishop b3 now. This diagonal, remember with that earlier pawn sack and the pawn mobility, that diagonal has really become a feature for white to make use of. Queen d7, and the queen drops back here, so still with this nasty bishop b3 lurking. There's a bishop without a counterpart again. What can you say? It's a bishop without a counterpart now. Bishop f6 was tried. Knight e5, hitting the queen. Queen moves, but now this killer bishop b3. Those light squares are just terrible now. Bishop takes e5, knight takes e5. Now here, if king h8, king h7 was tried. Well, it's the same basically as the game. There's the same sort of winning move as the game. So I might as well show you the game continuations. King h7, queen e4 check, centralising the queen, and that's where the James Bond film thing finished, with a queen centralising move. And then the player of white had to rush off somewhere, urgently called. I think he saw some message, some secret message. He was called away. Bronstein? No. He was playing against Bronstein. Okay. There's a video on my channel if you want to check it out. which goes into the details. So queen e4 check, black resigns. If g6, we go bang, rook takes f8, breaking down black's king safety. So for example, like this is a mate in 3. Ooh, checkmate. Yeah, so this check is lethal. If king here, again, we just take away that defensive knight. We can even just win the queen as well as checkmate here. It's mate in 2 after taking the rook actually, and then queen h7 checkmate. Don't even need to take the queen. So yeah, this is over after queen e4 check. So that was really nice as well. Some nice tactics in these games. Power of chess tactics. But the recipe for disaster is in the weaknesses, isn't it? Really, you've got to say it's in the weaknesses to start off with. If there's no weaknesses, there's no brilliance. You need the weaknesses to have the brilliance later. But he created those weaknesses very energetically. You know when he played knight e4, he got the pawn to c5, that opened up this whole diagonal, the whole rook sack. Wonderful stuff. Hope you enjoyed these 2 games tonight. Have a good week, and see you next week. Thanks very much. Cheers then.